Welcome back, friends and fellow philosophers, to this Wild Isle podcast. I'm your host, Marquise. This is the first time I've introduced myself. I've always forgotten every other single time, but I will not forget to introduce my guest, Brad, a.k.a. Wraith. How are you doing this evening, Brad?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've been excited for this one. So last time I had you on, we talked about writing. I think it was the genre podcast for the writing cast. This time, I actually wanted to talk a little bit more about just interests that I think we have in common in general, whether they be philosophical, politico-philosophical, just general interest outside of that. I know I believe, see, I don't know this about you, that you are a musician. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Mainly bass and a little guitar.
So I'll definitely be asking you about that. So for all of you listening in, make sure you stick around for the great conversation. But before we begin, I want to direct you to my website, wildislelit.com. There's lots of things that you can find there. Most importantly, my contact form if you would like to be part of this podcast. If I know you or know of you or you know of me and you think that you would be an interesting guest to have on the show, either for the regular podcast or the writing cast, go ahead there, wildislelit.com/contact and send me a form. Or if there's a topic that you want to hear discussed for the writing cast, you can go ahead and do that there. I won't run down the list of remaining topics today. I'll probably post them up with these videos across social media. Also, while you're there at wildoutlet.com, check out my editing page. If you are an author and you have a manuscript that you need to sharpen, or if you want to improve your skills and harken back to the ways of writing of our ancestors, then you can hire me as your style guide at the Wild Isle Style Guide. You can check out my offerings there. I've got 3 different packages. I'm thinking of expanding it in the near future. So do that. Jump in there while the prices are low, because with our rapid inflation, I'm going to have to increase prices, and I hate it, but that's how it is. Also, while you're there at wildoutlet.com, check out my novel, Wand Smoke Broken. It's a weird fantasy fiction novel with an American twist. You know who came up with that? Brad came up with that, and I love it. It reads a little bit like a Western mixed with a literary novel. I think you guys will think it's a lot of fun. First chapter is free on my website. Lastly, last news. I know they said the last thing was last, but it wasn't. If you're listening to this about when it releases, I may very well still be doing a Kickstarter campaign to fund the covers for Wand Smoke Tales from the Labyrinth. That's a story collection I'm going to be releasing, but I am an impoverished author and editor and philosopher here in Wheeling, West Virginia, and so I can hardly afford to eat. So you can save me and go check out the Kickstarter campaign. You can find links to it everywhere, particularly on my website. If you can, throw a couple bucks toward my way so I can get these book covers commissioned with a real artist, because I actually want to pay someone to do real work for the book covers. There'll be 5 covers in total, so your money is going to go a long way. And with that out of the way, Brad, I think how I want to start this conversation off is essentially where we left off after the end of our conversation during the writing cast. So you had sent my way a Stefan Molyneux video, and I am bringing up Stefan Molyneux because he actually was very formative in my own philosophical background. Really, I think Stefan is where I got into philosophy as such, under the name philosophy. Before that, I had inklings and interests, but wasn't quite formalized in my approach and in my education. So, what I'd like to ask you, because we have that as a common bridge, um, how did you end up finding Stefan Molyneux on the big wide internet?
I'm not quite sure. I probably just heard the name mentioned here and there from different YouTubers. Sargon of Akkad and Razor Fist come to mind. Um, Hearing the usual, nonsense about him like being a white nationalist and whatnot or something. I might have heard Kraut mention him as well. But then I eventually I got to watch some of his videos and thought this is pretty compelling stuff this guy's putting out there. So I just watch him every now and then.
Yeah, I came through a different avenue for Stefan. So I believe I was coming out of like the new atheist movement, and I think Atheism Plus was currently crashing and burning. and that sent me to look to new people. I was also a watcher of Sargon of Akkad, aka Carl Benjamin over at the Lotus Eaters. Shout out to them. They do great work over there, even if Connor is a little bit
Yes, they
cheeky
do.
sometimes. um, so did you have any background with the New Atheists back then? I don't know if you were
Um,
around.
Kind of. I was watching like The Amazing Atheist as a teenager. I was an atheist as a teenager. I'm not anymore. I read a little bit of Hitchens and Harrison, Dawkins. I think by the time the Atheism Plus thing was starting, I was kind of removed from it a little bit. Like I wasn't extensively watching too many of them anymore, I think. Yeah, not too much more to say about the my background there.
Yeah, so then we came in. So you came in from the Sargon and the Razor Fist side more so. So you had been. How long ago would that have been? Because I'm trying to place you in time. Like, so let's say, what were you doing around roundabouts 2008? Because that would probably be around when that was.
2008, I was just getting out of high school. That was way before I was aware of him at all.
Okay, so when did I graduate high school? 2010, I think. So you're probably a little bit older than I am. Um, TJ
I
Kirk.
graduated 2012. I guess you're a year or two older than me.
Oh, so it's reversed. Well, who knows?
Yep.
Now we know, Wild Isle listeners. But yeah, I've actually heard mentioned someone else that I encountered randomly in life had also encountered TJ Kirk. He happened to be someone who it's gonna. I'm not gonna disparage the man. I could, but I won't. Because he went I don't know how he is in his personal life. I haven't kept up with him in maybe a decade now because it was a right, that's about the time you listen to The Amazing Atheist, right? Is about high school, and then into college is when you start to perhaps expand upward and outward. Um, but he
Yeah, that's pretty
definitely
much
had
how it
an
went for me.
yeah. He definitely had an influence. He would say things. Actually, I was just having a conversation before this recording today, and you can tell me what you think of this. Something that he had said that had really stuck with me. He was kind of doing the classic, a bit left wing liberal critique of modern consumer culture, and he was saying, we have all these people, and all they're doing is waiting for distractions. Do you remember that line?
I do not.
Oh, you missed that one. Yeah, that was one of his things that I thought was actually quite poignant. The man is actually, I think, fairly intelligent. Um,
You can be
but
now and then.
it can be. Yeah, I haven't kept up. Have you kept up with him in recent years?
No, I've only heard this and that. I stopped watching his content quite a while ago.
Yeah, it seems like that was kind of part of the fall and the crash. Um, for those viewers listening from like the new atheist side, there were some YouTubers who were popular back then. The one that comes to mind was Thunderfoot. You might know Thunderfoot through his interactions with Sargon.
Oh yeah, I heard a lot about that when all that went down.
Yeah, it was a real tragedy. In the years past, he had been a really entertaining, decent figure. He made really scientific focused videos before, I
It was
think.
actually one that I never watched extensively. I was just aware of him. I never really delved into his content much.
Yeah, he was one of those types where I think he has like a double PhD in chemistry and physics. Like the man was a genius. He worked in like a nuclear reactor. He'd like take his phone in and record around the reactor. It was cool. Um, this was also around the time where, now we're having a kind of revitalization of religion and Christianity. That's kind of partly what I talked to Adam about in the podcast that should be out before this one. Um, and before that, though, and tell me if you remember this, and we'll come back around to Stefan and then into your personal philosophy in particular after we've covered this common ground between us. Um, Before then, though, I don't know if you remember the, let's say, the Christian Dominionist movement that rose up before that. So this was when you had the hardball pitch of intelligent design. This is actually what engendered the new atheist to become popular, was the prevalence of what I could describe as like fundamentalist evangelical Christianity, particularly as it made its way into the state, and then that gave rise to the or gave room really to the backlash by the new atheists. It gave them ground to attack. Did you get to experience that at all?
Not real time, I think. I might have been in the after, because we're talking late 2010s, and I was kind of just coming into it at that point, I think.
Oh man,
It
you
was,
missed out a
I
lot.
mean, yeah, a lot of the stuff I was not aware of until after the fact, I think.
Okay, then it really seems like your move into let's say the interest in what we'll use Stefan as a jumping off board. Is there a better jumping board to use than Stefan? Were there other influences that you were listening to at that around the time that might be more relevant?
What time are we talking about again?
So let's say around the times that you started to watch, let's say Stefan Molyneux's content.
When was that I got into his content? You'll have trouble keeping track of it all. I want to say probably 2018 or 19 that I started watching some of his stuff semi regularly.
Oh hell, that's a big jump. That's much later than myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, no
I'm
wonder
aware
he
that
got.
he's
Go ahead.
I'm aware that he's been doing it for quite a while. I think since like 2006 or 7. And I've seen some of his older videos, but yeah, it was a while before I was anyway extensively familiar with him.
Well, for those out there listening who don't know, so Stefan Molyneux is a very, very popular Canadian philosopher. He promotes anarcho-capitalism, essentially. As far as I know, I don't think he's changed on that view. And his fundamental moral philosophy is the universally preferable behavior, UPB. Are you a big subscriber to UPB, or a subscriber at all, or are you a libertarian? All what's your thoughts? It doesn't have to be in regard to Stefan. I just wanted to use him to get to this question really. So, like, how do you describe yourself, Brad?
Yeah. It's hard to say at any given time. His principles of like I'm aware of the non-aggression principle and UPB and all that. Like I have some like surface level knowledge of it. I'm really not. I wouldn't say I have a deep knowledge of philosophy. I've just seen some of his videos, and I'm somewhat familiar with the background of Greek philosophy. If you asking if I am I libertarian, it's funny. I almost was one in high school, and then I leaned far left, and then I've kind of bounced back to leaning somewhat in a libertarian direction, if only because I don't like absolute power.
Yeah, that tends to be kind of that corrective path. A lot of people go down. Sometimes they do it in like a bit of a reverse order to you. So I know coming out of high school myself, I was very left leaning, liberal. I guess yeah, I would say left leaning liberal type, like the type that you don't really the type that get confused and think that they're progressives because progressive is the word they use to describe themselves before um, what we see as and call progressive today are running them off a cliff. Uh, so yeah, that's what I was in high school, mostly because the people around me could not make good critiques. So, like, if someone had, this is actually why Stefan was relevant to me because that was the first time I'd encountered anyone making what we could roughly say are right wing philosophical critiques of the left wing ideas that it was posited. So, you're given these sophisticated arguments in high school. At least I was. I wasn't able to parse through them. I wasn't able to see any presuppositions being made. It just made sense. And the resistance I got were let's say, underqualified West Virginia high school teachers, right? And then we also had that Christian, very inarticulate Christian backlash, right? I don't want to. I'm not trying to besmirch Christianity as a whole, or even in part, really, but that is to say that at the time, the intellectualism and academia had been utterly abandoned by the right, and there I don't know if they're trying to bring it back or not. But it was then that I went into kind of the libertarian ideas. But then you mentioned it's kind of hard to describe yourself, right? Because the labels become so, um, let's say, loaded in people's minds. Like, is that something that you're aware of? Like, right when you go to say a word or apply a word, you're worried, like, okay, this is going to make them think these 12 wrong things that I have to then reverse engineer out of their head.
Yeah, that's part of it, but it's also because I'm not even sure I understand the terms well enough to be properly applying them to myself.
And that's fair. That's fair because it is tricky, particularly in the the labels, the terms, the names are not used very consistently, right? So like if I was forced on the spot, I would say like I don't know, like I'm a anarcho-capitalist in spirit, but probably a Confucianist in practice because I had it beaten into me through years and years and years of martial arts training. Um, in a sense that I recognize that hierarchies are inevitable and that in the very Lockean sense, and they're, you know, you have a state as a night's watchman, ideally, because it's a necessary evil due to the, uh, this is the Confucian bit, the inability of the people to act like adults. Like they're like feuding children that an adult must intercede at some point in order for them to not fall into the term people are using nowadays is a narco tyranny, right? But like even then, like that term wasn't being used last year in the common media sphere, so I think it's very hard to pin it down. You mentioned you had a bit of a background in Greek, some of the Greek philosophers. We were just talking Socrates, Plato, Aristotle.
Yeah, I wouldn't say a background. I'm just somewhat familiar, like I guess a surface level familiarity with most of them from taking high philosophy in high school, but I've not done any extensive reading on the subjects. Like I'm aware of Plato's allegory of the cave, and I've heard of the Republic. Doesn't really go much deeper than that.
Oh, so we're still kind of new and exploring then.
Hmm.
Yeah. Have you? I saw that. So we've had what, two aphorisms posted so far? I wanted to talk about those a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm actually really excited about that. So for those of you, I'm sure people who are listening to this podcast know, I try to post five of these little aphorisms a week, and then I saw that Brad recently has been very occasionally trying his hand at them as well, and doing a very good job, I might say, um, both in the content and clarity of that content, and then the presentation. I'm rather lazy. I just use the same picture and font and then throw it up there. Where Brad has this nice, colorful image and very beautiful font overlaid, and it's not overly long, so the text can be nice and readable. Um, so I know that you had seen me do them, and you'd mentioned me. Was there anything else that had driven you to try your hand at like boiling down your thoughts in that form?
I think other than seeing your aphorisms, I don't know that I would point to any one influence. It's just these thoughts that come to mind from time to time that I sit on for a while and let them develop and think, okay, maybe this is as close to correct as I can manage, and then at some point, I just decided to write some of them down to see how they sound, I guess.
Well, they sound pretty damn good. Do you have any more that you happen to be boiling on at the moment? Any thoughts, any issues, any questions, any problems that just are haunting you, like wraiths hiding? Ha, funny, right? Wraiths hiding behind your shoulders, lurking behind your back, ready to spring out at any moment.
I wouldn't say there's any. There might be. I mean, more like stray thoughts that if I figure out what to do with, I'll make something out of it.
Yeah. Well, the one that you'd mentioned, it was in a comments exchange over at Lines. I can't remember if it was under one of Captain Eternus's or Michael. He's been on the podcast. You can find out who that is, listeners. But it might have been one of his questions of the day. But we had a small exchange where, surprisingly, I think it was due to, I don't know if it was due to one of our conversations. It was due to something. You have to remind me that it inspired the most recent aphorism, I think. Right? Is that correct?
Do you mean the one about truth?
Yeah, I think it was about truth. Yeah, yeah, it absolutely was the one about truth. Let's talk about that for one for a little bit because I think there's some interesting conversation in there. So,
Ready?
yeah, yeah, just what, um, uh, let's see if I can. I don't know that I'd be able to bring it up right away. Do you remember? You don't have to obviously remember it well enough to know it, but if you could you remember it well enough to like paraphrase the general idea to the audience?
I can pull it up real quick and just read it aloud if that works.
That would be awesome. Thank you.
Da-da-da-da. Where I
Read
store
live for
that
the
one.
first time on the Wild Isle podcast. Aphorisms by Brad the Wraith.
All right, so there, yeah, so truth. Here we are. One sec for it to load. Yeah, so what I wrote is the truth, you say. Then I must ask, who am I to make any claim to any truth whatsoever? Truth, I think, is akin to God, the ultimate that which is of this world, unknowable to us except in the briefest glimpses. But still, many will passionately or viciously defend their vision of the truth. So convinced are they that the world must be shaped according to their will.
Yeah, there's like a ton of depth to that, right? So, let's pick that apart. I think that would be an interesting conversation. So, the truth you say, uh, are the truth. So, who am I to say? I think that was the first line. Um, you know, if you're a normal person, you're a normie walking around the streets. Like, I know what the truth is. The truth are facts. What do you have to say to that? Because that's what the normie would think when they see that first line, right? Usually, they think, well, I know the truth. The truth is what I see, and the truth is the facts that are, and I see them, so I know.
Mhm.
What? Yeah, what's wrong with that? If I'm going to be the normie, I
Uh,
want you to pick me apart here.
well, you could very well be. It depends on what facts you're referring to and who they're coming from and what sort of information you're taking into your brain, how you're pondering it, and more concise way I put it, what facts are you dealing with? What facts are you not dealing with? What are you factoring in and not factoring into your worldview? And how do you know you're not just tailoring it according to your own preconceived notions?
Well, I watch CNN and Fox News, so I know it all.
And you don't think they would have an interest in telling you things that aren't quite true?
Well, of course I do, but that's why I watch them both, and then I think it through myself, and then I come to my opinions, and then that's what I know.
I don't have these conversations very often, so I
Oh,
don't
you're
often know where to take them.
you are a lucky man to not have these conversations. Yeah, if you ever wonder why my aphorisms are so caustic, it's because I've had these interactions. um, but
As
yeah,
they need to
so
be.
yeah, right. But yeah, what we run into there is it's actually what the latter half of your aphorism talks about. Like they'll defend it ferociously. Like they have a kind of notion of gnosis, right? Um, yeah, I assume you're fairly familiar with the term gnosis, like spelled with a G, like
Yeah, meaning knowledge.
GNOSIS. Yeah, right. What makes gnosis different from knowledge, as far as you're aware?
I'm not familiar enough with the terms to say.
All right, for the listeners, and they'll have heard this probably before, but it should be heard a thousand times. So gnosis is the essentially divinely revelatory knowledge of the mind of God, or that is which is. So, um, one who obtain it's like a bit like Plato's Philosopher Kings. Um, it's also the idea of the let's say the Hegelian, I should say, difference between Verstand, which is the lower form of understanding, and Vernunft, which is this idea of true knowledge right? You can kind of see the no true Scotsman fallacy coming out right away. True knowledge that comes through this internal reflection. It's essentially what Kant was trying to get to by synthesizing categoricals. I know I'm probably butchering Kant. I haven't read Kant's work firsthand because I ordered a copy of the Critique of Reason. Did you know that that book in tiny little print is like as thick as a Bible? And so yeah, it's obnoxious. I did not think I ordered like Rene Descartes' Meditations, and it's like this tiny little thin pamphlet, and then this giant brick for all the freaking Germans. It's insufferable. Like I'm so happy Nietzsche wrote in aphorisms because if he didn't, he would have written like I don't know, just here to the moon. But the difference between knowledge and gnosis, there actually, in a sense, isn't too much different. So knowledge, classically defined as like a justified, true belief. So it's something that one believes, but that thing that they believe must also correspond with reality. It must also be true. But then the reason that they believe it must also be valid, right? And so we could think of this in the form of like of an argument made in us via a syllogism or some form of syllogistic logic where we've got a line of premises. The premises are true. The connection between the premises, they all follow to the conclusion. And then you have a sound argument. And if a belief is predicated on a sound argument, then you might say that constitutes knowledge. But your aphorism actually points out that, and you just pointed out here on the air, that actually there's a problem, and that problem is relevance. Um, so I don't want to jabber on too long, but the problem of relevance is that you actually need to know which and all, as much as you can, information is relevant to the conclusion. Because take as we know, if you strip out one piece of vital information, that could change the uh the whole of the conclusion, right? Like you add one premise or take one premise away, you could invert an entire argument.
Which is
And I
exactly what
think
you can
that,
do when you're trying to build a narrative.
yeah, it's precisely what you're trying to do. I used to I taught university courses, and when I taught them to do um, an argumentative essay, which is basically every kind of essay, essentially. I used to give this really funny example. I would say, okay, well, I shot John dead. Okay, or I shot Brad dead. Since you're here with me, shot him dead. Bam, I'm a murderer. But then if I say
Ah,
Brad kicked down my door with a shotgun, and I pulled out my revolver and I shot him dead. Okay, maybe that's self defense, right? And then if I say, well, I was taking pot shots at Brad out my window when he stormed up to my front door with a shotgun, and I pulled out my, you know, Glock 17 and shot him dead. Um, so you could see how, as you add on information, like you can cut the information where you want to um, change, let's say, change what seems to be true. And then we end up at this place where if that's the case, is there ever an is there ever an end at which it would be uh, proper and valid to stop searching? Like, what do you think? Is there ever a point where we could actually have? I think I know the answer, but is there a point where we could say, okay, we have searched enough, we know all the relevant details to come to a conclusion to say that we know a thing?
depends on, you'd have to take it on a case by case basis, and you've got to draw the line somewhere. That's probably going to be fuzzy depending on what it is you're talking about. Like in the example above, if I was to say I was taking pot shots at Marquise's house because I was angry and drunk because my daddy beat me that day or something like that, then you're veering into things that are not relevant to the situation at hand. At least one might argue.
Yeah, you could add in details that are the whispers of pathos, right? Because like I might say, well, my dad beat me that day, and then maybe someone who's very compassionate, very high in trait agreeableness gets kind of sappy about it. It's like, well, you know, it's not really Brad's fault. his dad beat him that day, and he needed to vent his frustration somehow. And you know, that Marquis there, he's like a weird loner, and he's bald. He's probably a skinhead. Um, well, hey, if they could pitch Stefan Molyneux as a freaking white, I actually think there are some things that he was saying around the time when the alt right was not occupied by any particular faction, that he said
Yeah,
around
before
those
that came to
times
be
that,
what it is now.
yeah, so he said some spicy things around that time, that I think made him vulnerable to being put there. But I'm a big fan of Nietzsche, who did the exact same damn thing, uh, and made it really easy for the Nazis to appropriate his work. So, it happens. Now, you mentioned, Brad, that you were an atheist, and then now that you're not, I assume, I'm not going to assume anything. Tell me about it.
Um, I was raised Anglican, and I think as a kid you just believe in. I mean, kind of upbringing where you kind of just believe in God because other people say that it's a thing. Don't really think too much about it. And then really it was one George Carlin routine, the one where he talks about God, that turned me into an atheist for quite a while because my best friend introduced me to that. Um, then I was, kind of like you, pretty much your typical edgy atheist in a fashion, which faded over time and quite know how to describe the journey beyond that. Um, Still not a Christian myself, but I don't care for the materialist worldview anymore either.
Yeah, we're seeing that a lot. I do want to say that the George Carlin being the fall from religion is a really great, like, origin story. Like, or
Mm.
perhaps not origin story. It's like, I guess in we'll call it like the fall before the redemption. Um, so it's interesting though that you said like the atheism faded, and the reason why I think that's interesting is because I really came from the notion of atheism as not a thing rather than a thing. Now, when I say that, I do recognize that that was not true for many, many atheists around the time that I began to become critical of religion, particularly in high school, early college. Um, so I recognize that when I say that, what I'm about to say actually does not apply to most of those people then, particularly the people we had mentioned heretofore.
It was more like the anti-theism angle faded, and then it was more like a moved away from being an atheist.
Yeah, that sounds about right, right? Or, "Well, look, Brad, we're parsing out the labels. Like by the end of this, you're going to be able to like, look, here are my labels. I will paste them on my shirt, and you will say hello, and then look at my shirt as if I'm a Walmart greeter. Um, but no, yeah. So the anti-theism fades. I actually really noticed that that's very, very typical, right? The desire to we might see this with the postmodernists of our day, which I think we both have a general distaste for. The types I'm talking about are those who will, let's say, in the artistic fields, because that's where they come from, is like the literary works, um, or the literary end of academia, I should say. They critique great works out of, let's say, envy, envy that they themselves um, perhaps can't live up to the ideals set or the standards set by those who came before. And it feels, especially when you're young, it feels good to be able to attack a titan, right? Like it feels really makes you feel strong. And then as you get older and as you start to become more comfortable with yourself, more confident in yourself, more um, able to uh, move yourself in the way that you want to in the world, perhaps gain more autonomy, but that comes with just getting older. At least for me, I know that desire, well, I shouldn't say the desire as a whole went away, but particularly the anti-theist desire started to fade. Is that kind of how it felt for you?
I think so.
And so, what would you say now, right? So, if the anti-theism faded away, uh, have you moved back into the direction of Christianity in particular, or is it something that you're wrestling with?
No, because like I said, I kind of just used believe in God as a kid because adults tell you it's a thing, and we went to church, but I would never I wouldn't say I was ever a believer of any strong conviction. So it wasn't that hard. Like hence the joke about a George Carlin routines. It wasn't that hard to knock me off um, that train of thought, or however it is you want to conceptualize it.
Okay, so that places, I think really that probably places us in a similar place. I was, I wasn't raised religious, but I wasn't raised like anti-religious. Um,
Hmm.
and particularly after of a conversation with Adam, and I think we'll have some commonality here. I find myself um, being the maybe you find yourself being this too. Tell me if you do. Do you find yourself being the not particularly religious person in a room full of religious people that you get along with?
Kind of, yeah, because well, some of the servers we're in have a couple of people who are creationist Christians, which if I told that to my teenage atheist self, he'd probably look at me weird.
Yeah,
They're
right.
people, and they're people that I respect because they're because they're very articulate and good at what they do, and they can have a good conversation with.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We talked about aphorisms. I'd written one. I think it was called "Curious Heretics" because I thought it sounded snazzy, the title. But it is something I've noticed where there seems to be a confluence of what had, I think, unrightly or unnecessarily been, let's say, factionations opposed or people opposed and put into camps and factions that I actually don't think are fundamentally in opposition toward one another. Like you mentioned, we're both in part of Discord servers and on social media um, with people who are I can only assume, devoutly and very religious in the very, in a sense, a very fundamentalist sense, and in a way that I too, my teenage self, uh, would not believe the level of just okay and acceptance, and even I shouldn't even use the word even, because I was to use the word even respect, but like I do actually have a lot of respect, perhaps because I find myself not really concerned with the subjectivity which is to say the beliefs of other people. Is that kind of? Do you feel the same way, Brad, about it? Just like it's a detachment from somebody else's beliefs.
I think so because at the end of the day, how do I phrase this? I don't make any claims to that absolute truth myself, hence the aphorism there. So I don't see any reason to for it to bother me what somebody else's claims are, because they don't know, they believe, but mm, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a liberation through agnosis. Like so, a gnosis, like not gnosis. Like once you let go of the idea
Mm,
that you have to know, then all of a sudden it's okay that you don't know, and then therefore it's okay that other people believe differently.
mm,
Yeah, I think that's perhaps that's probably like the ideal of the liberal toleration that we see if you like look at some of the philosophies. I'm thinking like Locke and then the American founders whose politics were essentially largely rooted in John Locke. Um, I think that's really what the idea was um, and behind tolerance. Um, why is that relevant? Oh, is there something you want to say, Rev?
no.
Okay, sorry. I'm picking up little blips on the audio, and sometimes it's just background noise. But tell me what you think of this, right? Because this is kind of a fun idea. Uh, so I think in the same way that one finds kind of freedom and peace in recognizing that absolute knowledge or gnosis is, uh, we could argue, essentially unattainable by human beings. It might just be unattainable flat out, like there's like to anything, right? Maybe, who knows? But at least to us. And insofar as it is unattainable and you recognize that you're free, but imagine if you don't think that, right? And this is kind of a fun idea. I think that people can become possessed by this solipsistic spirit. Are you familiar with solipsism?
I need to hear a definition again.
I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but essentially, like the solipsist, because he cannot, with any determinate, he cannot in any determinate way prove anything that exists outside himself, assumes that I don't know if they have to make this assumption, but typically when someone's, slander, I don't want to use the word slander because it says a lie. If someone's labeled or even self-labels as a solipsist, typically they don't believe anything is necessarily real that is not them, right? So they're kind of trapped in like a subjective box. This is the penultimate, like my lived experience is all that there is because nothing else exists outside of it, right? Well, this is something I had stumbled upon a little bit a couple years ago and have only more recently gotten better at articulating. I think that if you believe that um, you can know with like this kind of perfect knowledge, what it makes you do is it makes you think that something that is subject to you is that which is, right? It makes you essentially start to, in religious terms, you start to worship an idea that you have. You start to worship a false idol. Um, Maybe that false idol is a particular favored institution, in which case it would be like your own Tower of Babylon. But the thing is, if in fact um, one isn't correct in one's thought that he knows, right? Let's say one is in error. He doesn't actually have access to the objective 100% transcendental truth. Then what he's looking at is a subjective phenomena. And that changes the dynamic between people because if my entire world is predicated on subjectivity at its basis, that means that your subjectivity threatens my subjectivity. And
Hmm.
is that follow? Am I tracking so far? Or have I jumped off a cliff somewhere?
Oh, no, you're I follow. To put it in a more simple way, it's funny. I remember playing the first Assassin's Creed game back when it first came out, and hearing the character Malik say to Altair, "You cannot know anything, only suspect." And it's probably only very recently that I finally grasped the depth of the meaning of that statement.
Yeah, it's funny how bits of wisdom sit from your childhood like that. Do you have any more? Because I have one, but I want to pick more out of you if I can.
That's the only one that's comes to mind at the moment.
So one from me, I love this one, and you can really test someone's character by how they respond to it. So when I was in like sixth grade, on I think it was on Adult Swim, Fully Cooley had aired for the first time, I think in the U.S., and it had layers of effects on me as a kid that I wasn't prepared to interpret, but only could understand much later. And even now, if I go back and watch it, it's like watching a movie, right? It's like six episodes. There's so much packed in there, but one of the lines. So you've got the characters Haruko and Naota, and they're being vagrants on the road, and essentially they got two different packages of instant ramen, and Haruka got this really great big one that sucks because it's like a generic brand, and Naota got like a smaller package that actually tastes good, and so he criticizes her like you can't just get the big one because you got to go with what you know, and then she like steals his and gives him hers, and he eats it and he's like, oh, this is really bad, and here's where the wisdom comes in, right? Because she says to him, well, sometimes eating ramen that tastes really bad can be kind of fun too, you know? I think that's the exact quote. If I got that, I'll be happy with myself. But I usually change it. I just say, yeah, sometimes eating food that tastes bad can be kind of fun too. Um, Brad, what do you think the meaning behind that is? We'll use my version of it. Sometimes eating food that tastes bad can be kind of fun too.
Because it might become an experience that sticks with you that you can, laugh about later or get some broader lesson out of.
That's exactly right. For those of you listening out there, take Brad's translation because I think that is something that's really pertinent, right? Like sometimes those bad experiences, even if they feel bad in the moment, are actually really transformative and really meaningful, right? And so we shouldn't get we shouldn't try to eliminate all bad experience from our lives. And I think people, uh, to tie this back to that bit about subjectivity we were talking about before, I think that's kind of what's happening, right? So um, they, in order to escape discomfort, they craft for themselves some object of perfection. That's their utopia, their Tower of Babylon, their gnosis, by which they can eliminate all uncertainty from the world. And psychologically speaking, that's like eliminate. It's like killing all the dragons. There's no deep depths from which a dark monster can ascend. That really pisses me off because I wanted to say descend, but that's the opposite word. But it starts with D. Damn it! And I love alliteration. Um, yeah, you're probably sick of all my goddamn alliterations by now. For those of you who don't know, Brad's been
No,
reading through my
they can be
novel.
fun.
They can be fun, okay, because I use them way too much. Um, but yeah, people, when they get caught up in their subjectivity, um, they're doing that because it protects them. And what does it protect them from? It protects them from reality. And why do they need protection from reality? Well, I mean, if you've ever had any adverse experiences, you know exactly why you need protection from reality. But the problem is that um, it puts us in that place where people viciously and violently defend their foregone conclusions, right? Because if everyone else believes differently, then that puts me now at the margins, and it makes my belief have less power, and so people don't believe it as much, and I can't try and work my orc magic by just like believing the thing and wishing it to be true, and then being able to delude myself into the truth of it as a kind of opiate. So I think really, to tie these all three together, you got to remember that you can't know, you can only suspect, and in your suspicions, um, be willing to put them down for a second to try a bad experience because sometimes that's important. That didn't work at all, by the way. Um, it's probably a good
Yeah,
place to
sometimes
move
it'll
on.
just be a bad experience and not worth the bother.
Yeah, sometimes things are well, I have this saying, and you can tell me what you think of it. Nothing is just anything, right? It's always also something else. Um, do you think that's true? So nothing is just anything, right? Not just or only, but also, I think is the phrasing I had for it.
Not necessarily, because usually when you say that, you're comparing it to something greater. Like if you hear a noise outside and you say, "Oh, it was just the wind," you say "just" as a comparison to the greater threat that you thought it might have been. To say that's all that it is, but it's not what you thought it was.
Yeah, I think that's a fair application, right? Because it's now constrained, right? It's like I'm saying it was just this and not this specific other thing, but it doesn't exclude it from being, um, describable outside of the frame of the comparison, right?
Hmm.
So, where was I going with that? This is the risk of running off. Not just, but only, who knows? I was going to ask you about music. Let's just move there, and if it comes back to us, we can wander back. So,
Sure.
um, yeah. So, what got you into music?
Um, be a teacher of mine I had in elementary school is no longer with us. we did a school of rock type. Probably when I really started to get more serious about music is when we did a school of rock type thing, grade seven, where I played the drums for a couple of songs, which that was what I wanted to do for a while was play the drums. And I don't know what sparked my interest in it. Probably just in the bands that I was listening to at the time. But I eventually got picked up the bass, and I've been at that for over 10 years now.
Damn, that's some commitment. I assume you're pretty decent then.
Somewhat.
Are you playing for a band now, or do you just practice out on your own?
We're attempting a band. It's myself and my guitar player Connor. We're called King's Wrath. We've been looking for a singer for the better part of a year now. We got some demos out there. If anyone feels like checking us out, it's King's Wrath official on YouTube.
King's Wrath official on YouTube. So if you're a singer, join this man's three man. Or would it be a three-man band with a singer?
It would be. His brother is
Okay,
doing
join
drum
this.
samples for us, but we don't have a full lineup other than that. It's just the two of us right now.
All right, so join this man's three-man band, and there's got to be a word for this, for like something.
Give our music the voice it needs.
Yeah. So I assume you're doing. You guys play metal, right?
Yeah, it's some iteration of power metal.
Tell me about metal, because I don't know anything about metal. I saw on your little Discord thing that if you don't enjoy metal, then you're not friends, and I'd like to remain friends with you, Brad. So educate me, educate me about metal, so I can know what to listen to.
That is a line from a Manowar song that I listened to recently. I believe it's called Metal Warriors, where he says that line aloud. He almost says it in a falsetto, and I laughed so hard when I heard it because it's said with such conviction. It's funny. Manowar are viewed as one of those like kind of joke bands because they're so over the top in their image and their music and their lyrics and all that, but it's actually good shit to listen to.
All right, so Man of War is good to listen to, and what kind of metal would you say they play? Because I literally know nothing. So you're talking to an infant here.
Okay, that'd be power metal.
Okay, that's power metal. And what makes power metal like I said, break it down for me. What makes power metal different than other forms of metal, and what other forms of metal are out there? I know that there's something called death metal. I don't know anything about it.
Hmm. Okay, that's a lot to break down. Guess what I can start with is in the 70s you had bands pop up that started to play something more distinct from what rock and roll was at the time. They were playing stuff that was louder and faster and darker and all that. Black Sabbath is pretty much viewed as the band that kicked it off with their eponymous song Black Sabbath, those doomy chords that you hear. Motorhead was really influential in it. Judas Priest really helped kick it off as well in the late 70s. They became um, they pretty much were the earliest examples of a distinctly metal band. It was really in the late 70s that metal found its own identity separate from rock and roll, and then in the 80s it really took off with all the different subgenres spinning off and doing their own thing.
And just list a couple of the subgenres for me.
The biggest ones would be thrash metal. That took off in the 80s. That's like your Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax. That's usually faster paced stuff inspired by punk rock a little bit with harsh vocals. Death metal is like kind of like thrash metal, but down tuned and with the Cookie Monster vocals as they're colloquially known. Power metal is often played fast, but with usually with clean singing vocals. Usually with Dio was really influential in that in the early days in bands like Halloween and Blind Guardian. And there's a lot of fantasy lyrics and fantasy inspired stories and power metal songs. You've got black metal, which is the the scary stuff. Started with bands like Venom and Bathory. Um, where they took the satanic thing from black was a lot to mull over, but essentially it was taking some of the satanic references from Black Sabbath and looking more serious about it. And then that took off into the Norwegian scene where they became actually serious about it. Let's see, power metal, death metal, thrash metal. Those are then you've got offshoots like doom metal, which was the formula for which Black Sabbath created, and then I guess morphed into its own thing. Then there's all kinds of subgenres like gothic metal and Viking metal, melodic death metal. It's often said there are as many subgenres as there are bands.
That's good to know. I'm very happy to know the definition of power metal because that actually sounds like a place where I would like to explore. I like to investigate new, um, to use the damned word genres of music. Um, and I think that sounds like where I'd like to start because I do enjoy clean vocals. And I know
Mhm.
there's a lot of similarity. I've been told, and I can actually only believe it because I don't know enough about music. That actually a lot of metal is similar in its composition, its musical composition to uh, classical music and a lot of like very, high skill, sophisticated musical compositions. Is that true, or is that just something that people say?
Oh, that's accurate. Its roots are in the blues, like Black Sabbath were originally a blues or a jazz band called Earth. Which of course you have a lot of technically competent jazz players as well, so that probably has had its influence. But then I don't know what exactly it was that it was added to the formula, but you had a lot of particularly like guitarists adding classical elements to it, making the music that much more technical. Like I don't know if the guys in Iron Maiden are classically trained or anything like that, but I think they started using some interesting scales that was brought to form. Like Randy Rhoads is one of those famous neoclassical guitarists. Cliff Burton of Metallica, he had a background in music theory that he brought to their music. So yeah, like I said, '70s is when it started, became distinct from rock and roll, and then the '80s is when it took off and really became its own thing.
Awesome. Does your music ever cross over with your writing? What I mean by that, I mean I can mean anything by that, right? So in term because for those of you who don't know, but you should know because Brad's been on the podcast, but he is an author. Hopefully he'll be coming out with a novel here within some amount of time that I could promote and we could shill and you could buy and support him and then support his artistic endeavors and get him a damn singer. I want this power metal band to I want to be able to buy an album from you guys. I actually really do.
Appreciate your efforts, sir.
Yeah. But no, do you ever have any artistic crossover between the two mediums?
Between my own work, no, not that comes to mind anyway. Because I don't have a whole lot written in the way of lyrics for. No, I do have some lyrics written. Some of it's inspired by other stories, some by real life. But if the core of that question is, have I ever written a song out of something that was also a short story? No, not really. I pretty much keep them separate. Although my novel I'm working on now, a lot of the content of that story is inspired by some of my favorite heavy metal albums.
So the inspirations crossover then.
Yeah, and that's a thing in metal as well, where a lot of bands have taken a lot of influence from particularly fantasy fiction. Like there are a ton of bands that are named after places or characters or what have you in the Lord of the Rings. That's a huge influence on metal, especially in power metal and black metal. Um, which is funny because they're so starkly different, those two genres. But yeah, there's been a lot of there, like Blind Guardian. Their sixth album, Nightfall in Middle Earth, is a concept album based on the Silmarillion.
You know, that makes perfect sense. I went to a symphony. There's Wheeling doesn't have much, but we have this building. It's the Capitol Music Hall. So Wheeling at one point was the capital of West Virginia, and basically it was in a long stretch the only way across the Ohio River for a while. And so at one point there was a decent amount of money here, and there were for the time a decent number of people, and so you had this like piece of cultural significance. Why am I bringing it up? Well, I went and saw the Wheeling Symphony months ago now. Probably it might even be almost a year. I lose track of time. But when I was there and I was listening, and I hadn't really listened to much classical music. Classical is probably not even the right way to describe it, but nonetheless, I was listening and I realized listening that I was being taken on this journey. Like I could start to hear the sound.
Mm.
It's weird to say this, as help me out if I stumble around, but it's like I heard the sounds of nature, like I was being taken through a forest or over a mountain. I could feel the wind in the instruments. And it would make perfect sense, particularly like for fantasy, where you are taking stories that are very much embedded in that kind of, magic, like restoring the magic to nature that perhaps man once sensed when we are closer to it, in the music. Is what I'm saying making sense? Is that like the perhaps the connection?
Oh, that makes perfect sense to me. In fact, I would say it's music that's given me new ideas about something divine in this world because I do believe there's something divine in music.
Yeah, I think it was Richard Wagner who thought that, and Nietzsche was good friends with him, and that's how I know about this with Wagner. He had this essentially what sounded like a music cult, but I think Nietzsche also kind of believed it, and I suspect that I believe it too, that music is the purest form of art because it somehow directly it doesn't like reference a concept. Like if I write a word down, the word is like a categorical that fits over a generality of things that like I interpret through my senses, that aren't exactly the same in substance and are similar in form. Like it's, but with music, it's not that. Like you listen, and for some reason that's is like inexplicable, some tones, some chords. I'm going to start running out of words because I don't know anything about music. But they take you somewhere, and it's not like the sounds. This is my experience, and correct me if I'm wrong. Like sometimes the chord of the sound, the tone, the whatever it is, it doesn't even have to sound like the experience it gives you, but it still gives you that experience reliably. Do you get that same experience with music yourself?
Yeah, because there are the simplest example of that I can give is the difference between major and minor chords, where major chords typically sound, the are the happy ones, and minor are the sadder, gloomy sounding ones. Like if you play an E minor and if you play an E major and E minor right next to each other, you'll hear the difference, and you can see how they're used in different pieces of music to a different effect. And getting with the idea you were getting at with Wagner before, I heard uh, Jordan Peterson say a while ago, and I don't know, he was quoting someone else. I can't remember who, but all art aspires to the condition of music.
Hell yeah, that's true. I mean, I know like as an author, and I think I miss the mark on this a lot, but I definitely aspire to do it, and I try to encourage other people to do it where I can. It's not correct for all styles of writing, so I don't push it too much, but um, I when I'm reading, like I want to hear the music in the words. Like it's almost like I want not every book, but I want the fiction I'm reading to be like a lyrical poem. I want it to have that music embedded in it. Do you aspire to that in your writing as well, or is it just something that is it something that happens? What do you think?
I wouldn't say that's something I consciously go for because that changes so much over time as I change, but I can see where you would be trying to do the same thing foundationally that you would with music, where essentially you're piecing something together to a desired effect, and you're working with sounds in the case of music and words in the case of writing, and the results can be drastically different depending on how you configure these building blocks you're working with.
Yeah, there was another question. I lost it because I wanted to focus on what you're saying. So he has these building blocks of writing. Uh, here's something that was on my mind earlier, right? So I'm gonna put you on the spot here. I have
Oh boy.
this story. I've had this story idea for years now. Not that many years, actually, maybe just 1 year. I can't remember. I lose track of time. The point is, there was a they probably don't fall into the realm of metal, but the where would you place the Canadian band Rush? What are they in?
They're a rock band, but they have had their influence on metal. Like their early, there's a passage in Temples of Syrinx where they do a galloping thing, and it really sounds like an Iron Maiden song before Iron Maiden. Another example comes to mind is I believe Mike Portnoy, formerly of Dream Theater, said that when that band started out, they wanted to be a cross between Rush and Iron Maiden. So they and Another example comes to mind. Cliff Burton of Metallica, he was a big fan of Geddy Lee, cited him as an influence as a bass player. And one time, Geddy Lee showed up to a Metallica show, and he was really really nervous. before they were going on stage. So yeah, not a metal band, but they have definitely had had their influence in metal.
Yeah, well, they've had their influence on me, and so maybe you could help me with some metal influence that they that is, I don't know, cousin strains is trying to tie this in with like a evolution metaphor. Can't do it. Doesn't matter. So I have this idea where so you'll know where this is in the book. So the city of Cynic. Um, have you read that far?
Yeah, the southernmost city in on the island.
Yeah, yeah. So essentially at some point I want a bunch of revolutionaries to like stand up against the like socialist fascist dictatorship, and I want them to they're the center of their movement to be around music. Like um I want to have musicians playing freaking like unicorn hair string guitars, like s- with something I don't know, but I because the song from Rush, Bastille Day. Have you heard Bastille Day?
I don't think I've listened to that one, but I have heard of it. It's off of on Caressive Steel, their third album, I think it is.
I wouldn't know. The album it's from, but I haven't listened to that much Rush, but enough to have heard that song, and that song. Like I need to capture that spirit, right? Where you take this like very nationalist song. Like I think they basically took the what I assume that was some Canadian national anthem or something. Uh, that they had the song.
I
It's a
am thinking Bastille Day has something to do with the French Revolution, but I'm not sure. Yes,
you
yeah,
know it
I'm
absolutely
reading about it
does.
now. I
It
know the
absolutely is.
storming of the Bastille.
Yeah, it's about the whole song is like I love that Rush do this, by the way. They a lot of times in their music, when they're critical of something, instead of attacking it in their song, they orient the lyrics from the perspective of the thing that they're critiquing, and then just show you what it looks like. So in Bastille Day, they like embody the raving, like murderous Jacobin lunatic out to like just murder people and salt the earth and to celebrate the Bastille and the guillotine and just off with their freaking heads. Um, but yeah, I like um, uh, I don't know. Is there if I know this is kind of impossible to do with fiction, you're limited to what you can do with the written word. But if you could give me some advice for when I finally write the scene where I'm trying to capture the capture the feeling that I get when I listen to Bastille Day. I know you haven't heard the song, but yeah, it's in the same way like you hear music and it takes you there. Like you now can be in that space and that in the way that that music is pure as we described. Um, is there any are there any thoughts like if you were tasked to capture the spirit of a particular song in I don't know, like a story, for instance. Uh, what comes to mind for you? What would you do to prepare for it? How might you approach it? Because I really want to capture that spirit, but my separation from music, like I'm not knowledgeable of music, I'm not skilled with music in any sense. So I feel like I'm in over my head wanting to do this. So any advice would be helpful from an actual musician.
Me giving anybody advice, what a thought. Um, eh, Other than listening to this song, you got to think of how building blocks of what you're working with are meant to achieve a similar effect. It's funny because I have a similar, I don't want to say conundrum, but a similar task with the story I'm working on now myself. Where there's this one Blind Guardian, my favorite band for the record. There's this one song they have called the Bard Song off their fourth album. It's an acoustic ballad, a power metal band, but it's one of their best known songs. Like when they play it live, the audience knows every single word. It's a hymn essentially. And there's a chapter I have in mind. I don't know if it'll even end up working out. But there's a chapter I have in mind that's going to be called the Bard Song, and is going to content of that chapter is meant to have a similar thing play out. I guess on the importance of music is a low quality way to describe it. Which I'm aiming to give that chapter a feeling that is reminiscent of the feeling of that song, and how exactly to go about that, I'm really not sure myself. I'm not sure what to say there.
Well, part of the thought, just listening to you talk about it, we talked about like being taken on the journey that the song takes you. So what do you
Hmm.
think? What do you think of the first thing is identifying from the song, like where it takes you and how it takes you there? I know that's a very vague way to say it, but does that make sense?
No, that does. You want to be familiar. You want to be familiar enough with the song that you know the feeling it's meant to invoke. You more or less know the story that it's trying to tell, or at least you have solid interpretation of it. That even if it's not true, you can spin it into something that works with the story you're working on. I'm kind of doing that myself, where in the influences I take from my for the story I'm working on, the influences I take from the some of my favorite metal albums is kind of like I'm reimagining or reinterpreting them in a certain way.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So this is actually really, really interesting. So for you listeners out there who didn't think that this is a writing cast, I guess you're wrong. It'll be a music writing cast. But so the places that the song takes you, you kind of described almost like a narrative arc. And what a narrative arc is, it's essentially a movement in conflict that resolves at that climactic. And I think in terms of like the term climax, that was used originally in music, is it not? And then it was adopted later to theater.
I don't know myself.
Oh no, I'm thinking of the word crescendo. Doesn't matter. Um, the,
Yeah, that
uh,
sounds about right.
yeah, yeah. But I think it's the same idea. Like there's a building of tension and a setting of tone moving toward a moment. Now I don't know if this is true in music. You could tell me. In poetry, there is typically, even if you don't mean to put it there, it almost always comes about a turning point, right? It comes about the same place that the climax would in a story. So it's usually like toward the end, in the latter quarter, and then there's a kind of falling out resolution that comes from that turn in the poem, that kind of corresponds with the peak of a narrative arc that moves toward the resolution. Is the same thing true when you're composing a song?
Yeah, you'd probably be thinking of the bridge of a song, which is typically in very standard musical composition, like in pop songwriting. Generally you go verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, ending. You can get more complicated than that and play around with things and move the parts around if you like, but that's essentially where it goes. And the bridge is where it breaks away into something different, and then it kind of you break away into something different, but you still find a way to resolve it and bring it back to where you were originally in the chorus and the last verse and the outro.
Brad, you're a genius. Um,
Hope to
I,
validate
I
you.
No, I mean it. Like, look, okay, so for those of you who can't see my face, which is none of you because I'm not recording video, um, okay, so what we've done here is we've identified that um, there is in fact an order to the universe. We have discovered the mind of God. No, I'm kidding. So only partially. I'm only partially kidding because I actually do think that well, this look, man, this is why I wanted to have this conversation because I knew that if I kept poking at you, I would discover wisdom. Um, so, okay, so the bridge is the turn, the bridge is the climax. Okay, so if I'm taking this and tying this into my understanding of literature, which I think should just correspond across these mediums because the mediums are trying to correspond to reality. And if reality is that which is, reality is God. This is why I said we're going to know the mind of God here. I don't actually think that, by the way. I'm not a Gnostic wizard. I'm merely an agnostic wizard. So, all of my Christian friends, it's okay. I'm like Merlin, the pagan wizard helping the Christian King Arthur. Don't come after me. Please still be my friends. Uh, um, but so what that means is that if you want to take the spirit, that's the right word too, right? If you want to take the spirit of the song, you look at the structure of the song, and you've got these essentially the musical forms of a complication in the plot of a novel. So as you shift from was it chord and chorus? Were those terms you used?
Verse and chorus.
Verse and chorus. See, I'm totally ignorant. I apologize. So it was the verse, chorus. So
The chorus is the part of the song where it's got the part. The chorus is the part of the song that repeats, that everybody remembers, and then the verse is I guess the lead into that varies.
so that does make sense. So like the verse is almost like I would describe that as the complication, right? The verse then, because it's something that's different. It takes you to a different place. It has the
Yeah, something like
components that you
that.
don't expect. Um, and so that's the rising action essentially is that switching between
Mhm.
verse and chorus, and that's leading us into the bridge, which is that lead into the climactic moment, that then leads back down into the resolution. So if we're structuring a chapter or a story or anything in narrative to really embody the song, at least structurally speaking, we do actually have a guide point, right? Because you can take those components of the song and you can map out the rising action of the plot, um, with the movements of the song. And that's one component. And then you could layer on tone, right? Because the tone of the song you could identify with those same components. And then once you've layered on the tone, then the only thing left really is the theme, right? So when I use the word theme, I'm actually going to do a podcast about theme with one Fallon Clark. So she's an editor, and if you need stuff edited, particularly she does developmental editing for stories. So rather than stylistic editing, you can check out Fallon. Free shout out for her. But in terms of the theme, what I mean by that is the thesis. Like this is going to be interesting because now we're going to investigate this with music, right? So if there's a theme in literature that corresponds to like the thesis of an argument or of an essay, which is a claim about what is true, and a claim about what is true is a claim about that is which is. Again, we're investigating the mind of God. Um, so so what?
Horrors
So
await.
is there a theme? I expect yes. So like do songs in a sense make claims about truth, about life, about that is which is?
Not necessarily. They might be exploring those ideas. Hmm. It's an interesting. Yeah, I don't think I have any more to add than that.
Well, let's take it from a broad approach, right? Because I suspect that in the same way that you could have a very simple story, you could have a very simple song, and that very simple song is going to describe maybe one component of life. Like I'm here in West Virginia, right? So I hear country music a lot, and one of the things that make again, I'm outside my field, so I might say something stupid. So please correct me. I'll probably say something stupid. But one thing I've noticed is that one thing that makes country music what it is that almost universally the aspect of life that it describes is a very simple component, right? It doesn't, typically country music does not investigate deep or intellectual endeavors. It doesn't answer those types of questions, but it does describe elements of the lives of the people who typically really like to listen to country music. So I could say, and tell me if you think this is wrong, as an easy example, something like a country song about drinking, or a country song about your truck or your dog or your ex-wife. Um, and I
Pretty much
think
just
that's
covered
about
the whole
all.
genre there. So
Yeah, that was my goal, right? But that's like a common element to um, the I'm trying not to use Nietzschean terms. I was about to call them like the West Virginia herd. Uh, but 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 yeah, like not to disparage them, but like, to the everyman rural, folk, is that not, would we not say that the claims made in those songs, or there are claims made in those songs about about country life, about rural life of the common man, of that environment, and that you could even say that those songs are perhaps even true.
yeah, because they're just meant to be relatable to the lives of the people who play it and who live it. Um, I'm realizing what I should probably do is separate claim from truth, because I said earlier, you might just be exploring an idea. It's like I just be putting something out there. Maybe this, you're putting a claim out there, and maybe this is true. And that's probably the way that I would have to view it in my own storytelling, because as established by the aphorism, I dislike making claims to absolute truth because I could very well be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you worded it earlier, so this ties in both your aphorism and the Assassin's Creed quote. Like, you can really only suspect, you can't really
Mm,
know. And I think that's a good way to think about claims, because you had said in our conversation about that aphorism, um, that you kind of got caught up on the fact that, like, you can't make a claim to absolute truth. So I get what you're saying when you're saying that, right? Because what you're saying is, I actually don't know with absolute certainty, so it would be silly to make a claim about it. But then you run into a second problem, and that second problem is that you're like a human being, and you have to act in the world, and you have to act as if a thing is true
so
without
maybe in that
claiming.
case, you redefine a claim as something you suspect.
Yes, so like a claim
Some
would be
instances.
like, it would be like a belief that you're putting out to be tested, right? Like, because you might have a belief that you're not putting out in the world, it's just something you personally hold. But a claim is saying, okay, not only do I have this belief, but I'm throwing it out in the world to see if it's true. And you don't
Mm,
necessarily know whether it's true or not indefinitely, but like, this is thinking a little bit scientifically, because I have a bit of a scientific background for my bachelor's degree. It was exercise physiology, which is basically exercise science, but they do actually study that with the same, well, hopefully now with more scientific rigor that you would do any other scientific study. But you don't prove something in science, you fail to falsify. But as you continuously
mhm.
fail to falsify, you become more confident in the utility and reliability of the claim. And so we might
Case for it
say,
becomes stronger.
say that again?
Case for it becomes stronger.
Yes. And so I think that's how we should think of the word claim. So to tie that back to music, then, um, so songs do then, or would we say, because I shouldn't just bulldoze over that. So would we say then that the songs do make a sense, in a sense, a claim about the nature of truth?
You could probably argue that again, whether or not you'd say a claim is being made, whether or not the author or songwriter or whoever actually believes it's true. Maybe they're just exploring an idea or just trying to tell a story from somebody else's perspective. Maybe they're trying to iterate someone else's claim.
Yeah. And we might say the same thing about stories even. And the reason why I wanted to go through all that was to tie it
Of
back to
course.
theme. Yeah. Um, so this will solve both of our issues, right? Like, I hope so anyway. So insofar as we're trying to cross these mediums, uh, I think looking at it structurally, so looking at the verse and chorus, moving to the bridge, and then the resolution that comes after that is like looking at the um, essentially the rising action of a story and the complications that would correspond to the verse, and then paying attention to the tone that is conveyed across those complications across the verse, and then that what tone you return to when you come into the chorus, um, and then the bridge being like the climactic moment, what gets conveyed there, right? And then we're looking at theme. So like, uh, now this might not correspond exactly perfectly because I imagine, well, I would think, I would think that there's probably something all the way down that differs in the bridge because you said that's where you really play with the song and do something different is in the bridge, right?
Yeah, where you deviate from the established order of the song, but you still find a way to just circle back to where you were before.
Yeah, so um we should see something claimed that resolves the uh either the conflicts or the questions, or the uncertainty, uh or that resolves a change in the tone that gets built up to before. And I think by following that pattern, um, we might both be able to manage to write out some bit of fiction with the same spirit of the songs that inspired them. What do you think of that analysis?
Mm, I'd have to ponder it for a while, but I think that checks out so far.
Well, please do ponder it. If I slipped up somewhere, and you listeners, you could let us know if you're watching this on YouTube in the comments what you think. Really, we'd appreciate it. But yeah, that conversation like that is really the reason I wanted to have you on, because I would have never thought of that on my own. Right? Like I needed your expertise, uh, in order to. No, you're laughing. And for those of you who can't see, I can see when he's chuckling inaudibly because his microphone still picks it up, but it ticks up on my little bar there. Um, but really, uh, really, man, don't discount yourself. And I would say this, uh, as a word of encouragement, particularly to anyone out there listening, that if you're in any artistic venture, it's a long, grueling process. But after you've been in it for enough time, you will have more expertise than you think that you do. And the reason why you'll think that you don't is because you spent so much time not having it and you uh got used to being not very good. And usually we have, at least I had this with as an author, the awakening of your own inability. Like you start out and you're starting to build some skill and you think, oh yeah, I'm great, and then you have that moment and you're like, oh no, I'm awful, and you just get stuck there. And that, yeah, I assume you're laughing. You've had that common experience, but with
Yeah,
writing
and I
and
don't know
music.
that I. Yeah, and more so with writing music. It helps to have somebody to collaborate with to bounce ideas off of.
Oh God, is that nice? Not having to bear the lonely weight all later. So I say that, but then you put two writers in a room and have them write a story together, and they'll kill each other, be at each other's throats. Um, so you mentioned working with somebody else. What is it like, composing music with someone else? Because like I just mentioned, as an author trying to compose a narrative with somebody else, like you can do it sometimes a little bit, but it gets kind of sketchy pretty quickly. Um, it seems different with music. How is it?
Um, I don't know how different with music it is, because with any collaborative endeavor, it's going to depend on the chemistry of the two or more people involved. I'm lucky that my guitarist, he's a few years younger than me. I just met him a couple of years ago, but I think he and I are on a pretty similar wavelength musically. And usually it's the case that because I recorded a lot of stuff for years before I met him, and then I brought some of my songs to the table, and we were pretty much bouncing ideas back and forth. I'll say, okay, this is how I think it should go next, and he'll say, that doesn't necessarily work that way. We can do this instead. Blah blah blah. So in my experience anyway, and this is with just with this current project. When with my with the band I was in for a while, I didn't do any songwriting except for my bass parts. But for the project I'm currently involved in, it's enjoyable process, I think.
Does it help that you have different roles in a band?
I think so because those components of the song need to be there. In the case of heavy metal, it's usually guitar, bass, drums, and vocals. And him being on guitar, me being on bass, I do write some guitar parts. Like I can riff. I could probably be a decent rhythm guitar player, but I'm a lot more practiced at bass. So he and I are filling in different parts of the song, and it probably comes out as more complete than it would if we were just two guitar players.
Yeah. I mean, I wish you could do that with writing. Like, I really do. You just like, yeah, okay, you do the setting, I'll do the plot. Like, how the hell does that work? Um, right. Uh, but that's really cool. I don't know where to go from here. Do you have any particular questions, anything that has bubbled up in your mind over the course of the conversation, Brad?
Not that comes to mind immediately.
All right, well, we've been going on for a while. I don't want to keep you all day.
Mhm.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. Before we go, remember to check out King's Wrath, particularly if you are a singer. They need a vocalist. Does a vocalist obviously would have to live nearby, right? I don't know if you want to give out a local area that they, you know, they could check you guys out.
Based in Prince Edward County, Ontario. I don't know if anybody listening will be there, but if you are, hit us up.
Yeah. So check them out, guys. Do you have like a website or anything you can send people to?
We just have the YouTube channel for now. It's King's Wrath official on YouTube.
All right, King's Wrath official on YouTube. Check them out. If you're not subscribed, subscribe, like their stuff, comment, support them, you goddamn freeloaders. Speaking of freeloaders, I guess I'll take my turn to shill. Before you guys go, please check out my Kickstarter. I'll probably have a little outro after the video talking about that. But also my other content. You can find all the other podcasts on my website. We're on Spotify and Google. You could find us there, and Apple, and SoundCloud, and YouTube, and my website. I already said that. Yeah, those are all the places you can find the podcast. Check out my novel. I'd really appreciate it. First chapter is like up there free. I did an audio reading of it. Check it out. I'd really appreciate it. And like I said, if you're an author, I do editing. Uh, just look over my services to see what you think. See if you're impressed, and if I can help you out. You can learn all the stuff that I learned in grad school without having to get $100,000 in debt. Not that that will matter here in a few years when $100,000 is what you carry in a wheelbarrow to buy your bread at your grocery store. Um,
Now, sure, it
with
won't
all,
come to that.
uh, no, it'll just be on like a little digital thing in your skin. But that's that's neither here nor there. That's like a whole new
I don't know what's
podcast.
worse.
Yeah, the dystopian
Yeah,
future
let's not go down that rabbit hole right now. Just
yeah,
let
we'll
it
go
be.
down that. Yeah, we'll let that happen on Discord. All right, guys. This has been a really great conversation, Brad. Thank you for helping us come to that epiphany about the structure of music and its correspondence to other mediums. And we're really gonna listeners too. You think about it, but Brad, you think about it. I'll think about it because I think if it's true that music is really the purest form of art and therefore is closest to like the transcendent, however you want to think about that, whether you're religious or you're weird Merlin like secular philosophers or what have you. um there could be really something deep there worth exploring more. All right, Brad, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this conversation. And for all of you listening, I will see you next time. Greetings, friends. Thank you for tuning in. If you're watching or listening between May 27th and June 26th of 2023, I have an important announcement. A Kickstarter campaign is currently underway to fund the covers for the upcoming Wand Smoke short story series, Tales from the Labyrinth. Please like, comment, and share this video or podcast to help spread the message as far as possible. And if you'd like to donate, click the Kickstarter link in the description to support the campaign. You'd be helping fund 5 book covers. That's 5 releases over the course of the year and 5 steps closer to bringing a dream into reality. Thank you so much, friends. I look forward to sharing these stories with you.